The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned streets of New Haven, once a thriving metropolis now reduced to skeletal remains of concrete and steel. Sarah pressed her back against the cold brick wall of what used to be a department store, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp air as she peered around the corner. The silence was deceptive, she had learned. That in this new world, quiet meant either safety or imminent death, and distinguishing between the two had become a matter of survival. 3 months had passed since the outbreak began, though it felt like years. The virus, as the scientists had called it before the communication networks failed, spread faster than wildfire through populated areas. Those infected didn't die immediately, instead, they transformed into something that retained the basic motor functions of humanity while losing everything that made them human. Sarah had watched her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, change from a kind elderly woman who baked cookies for the local children into a mindless creature driven by an insatiable hunger for human flesh. The compound where Sarah now lived with 43 other survivors stood like a fortress in the heart of the city. Built around an old fire station, the community had reinforced the structure with salvaged materials, steel plates welded to windows, barricades of overturned vehicles, and a network of watchtowers constructed from scaffolding and sheet metal. Marcus Rodriguez, a former construction foreman, had designed most of the defenses, while Dr. Emily Foster, the group's only remaining medical professional, tended to the wounded and sick in their makeshift infirmary. Sarah's radio crackled to life, breaking the eerie silence. "Sarah, this is base. We've got movement on the east perimeter. Large group, maybe 50 or 60. The voice belonged to Jake Morrison, a young man barely out of his teens who had proven invaluable as their communications coordinator. His ability to maintain and repair their equipment had kept them connected and alive. "Copy that, Jake. I'm about 4 blocks out. What's their heading?" Sarah adjusted her grip on the modified crossbow she carried, checking that her quiver was full. Ammunition was precious, and silent weapons had become their preference for dealing with scattered threats. "They're moving slow, but steady. Looks like they're following the main road toward the compound. ETA about 30 minutes if they maintain current speed." Sarah's heart rate quickened. 50 zombies wasn't insurmountable, but it was more than they typically encountered in a single group. The infected usually wandered in smaller clusters, drawn by noise or the scent of prey. Large groups meant something had attracted them, or worse, something had driven them toward the compound. "Jake, get word to Marcus. I want all perimeter defenses activated. And tell Anna to prep the fallback positions." Anna Kowalski, their tactical coordinator and former police sergeant, had developed contingency plans for various scenarios. Sarah hoped they wouldn't need them, but preparation had kept them alive this long. Moving carefully through the debris-strewn street, Sarah made her way toward a vantage point on the second floor of a partially collapsed office building. The stairs creaked under her weight, each sound amplified in the hollow structure. Through a broken window, she could see the approaching horde. They moved with the characteristic shuffling gait of the infected, their clothes torn and stained, their faces bearing the vacant expressions of the living dead. But something was different about this group. They moved with more purpose than usual, as if responding to some unseen signal. Sarah had studied their behavior extensively, and this level of coordination was unusual. The infected typically operated on pure instinct, drawn by immediate stimuli. This group seemed to have a destination in mind. Her radio whispered again. "Sarah, we've got a problem. There's another group approaching from the north. Smaller, maybe 20, but they're moving faster." The realization hit her like a physical blow. They were being flanked. Either by coincidence or by some form of primitive intelligence, the infected had chosen to approach from multiple directions simultaneously. Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. The compound's defenses were strong, but they were designed to repel attacks from a single direction. A coordinated assault from multiple angles would stretch their resources and manpower to the breaking point. "Jake, sound the alarm. This isn't random. We're under coordinated attack." She paused, watching as more infected emerged from side streets, joining the main group. And Jake? Get everyone to battle stations. This is going to be a long day. The first drops of rain began to fall, creating a steady drumbeat on the abandoned cars below. Sarah shouldered her crossbow and began making her way back toward the compound, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether their small community would survive to see another dawn, or become just another casualty in humanity's desperate last stand. The compound's alarm system, a network of air horns and metal plates, shattered the morning calm as Sarah sprinted through the empty streets. Behind her, the sound of shuffling feet grew louder, accompanied by the distinctive low moaning that had become the soundtrack of their nightmare world. The infected had detected the alarm and were now moving with increased agitation, their primitive nervous systems responding to the noise like moths to flame. Sarah's lungs burned as she pushed herself harder, knowing that every second counted in the deadly mathematics of survival. Marcus Rodriguez stood atop the main watchtower, his weathered hands gripping a pair of binoculars as he surveyed the approaching threats. The former construction foreman had transformed from a man who built structures to one who defended them, and the weight of leadership showed in the lines around his eyes. Through the lenses, he could see the eastern horde more clearly now, their torn clothing fluttering in the morning breeze, their faces bearing the vacant expressions of the living dead. But it was their movement that concerned him most. They weren't wandering aimlessly as infected typically did, they were maintaining formation, moving with purpose toward the compound as if guided by some unseen intelligence. Anna, I need you on the north wall. Take Tommy and Lisa with you. Sarah's bringing friends from the east, Marcus commanded into his radio, his voice carrying the authority that had kept their group alive for 3 months. The compound bustled with activity as survivors rushed to their assigned positions, each person knowing their role in the defensive strategy they had drilled countless times. Anna Kowalski moved with military precision, her police training evident in every step. She grabbed her rifle and tactical vest, already mentally calculating fields of fire and ammunition reserves. The compound's armory was well stocked but not infinite, and every shot had to count. Tommy Chen, Sarah's younger brother, fell in beside her, his face pale but determined. At 19, he had aged years in the months since the outbreak, learning to kill to protect the people he loved. Lisa Martinez, a former nurse who had become their secondary medic, checked her medical supplies as she jogged toward the north wall. What about the children? Anna called out, referring to the 6 young survivors who had become everyone's responsibility. The youngest was only 8 years old, a girl named Emma whose parents had died in the early days of the outbreak. She had attached herself to Dr. Foster, following the doctor around like a shadow, finding comfort in the woman's steady presence. Dr. Foster has them in the safe room, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. The safe room, located in the basement of the original fire station, had been reinforced with steel plating and stocked with enough supplies to last a week. It was their final fallback position, though everyone hoped it would never be needed. The children knew the drill. When the alarm sounded, they were to go directly to Dr. Foster and remain quiet until the all-clear was given. Jake Morrison's voice crackled through the radio network from his position in the communications center. Marcus, I'm picking up something strange on the radio frequencies. There's some kind of low-frequency signal that started about 20 minutes ago. It's not human communication, too regular, too simple. The young man's technical expertise had proven invaluable, and his ability to monitor multiple channels simultaneously had given them early warning of threats in the past. Could it be some kind of automated emergency broadcast? Marcus asked, though he suspected the answer would be more troubling. The government emergency systems had gone silent weeks ago, and most infrastructure had collapsed along with civilization. Negative. This is something else entirely. And Marcus, the signal started right around the time the zombie groups began moving toward us. I think there might be a connection. The implications sent a chill through Marcus that had nothing to do with the morning air. If the infected were somehow communicating or being controlled, it changed everything about their survival strategy. The compound's defenses had been designed to repel mindless attackers driven by basic instinct, not coordinated forces with tactical awareness. Sarah's voice broke through the radio chatter as she reached the compound's outer perimeter. "This is Sarah. I'm at the east gate. These things are moving differently than anything we've seen before. They're not just following each other, they're positioning themselves strategically, spreading out to cover more ground." She paused, catching her breath as she prepared to enter the compound through the reinforced gate. "And there's something else. Some of them are carrying things, rocks, pieces of metal. They're using tools." The revelation hit the defenders like a physical blow. Tool use represented a level of cognitive function that the infected had never displayed before. If they could use tools, they could potentially overcome barriers that had previously stopped them. The carefully constructed defenses that had protected the compound for months might suddenly be inadequate against an enemy that could think and adapt. Marcus made a decision that would define their survival. "Everyone, listen up. We're dealing with something new here. Standard protocols may not apply. Stay alert, conserve ammunition, and be ready to adapt. We've survived this long by being smarter than they are. Today, we find out if that's still enough." The infected struck the eastern perimeter at exactly 10:47 a.m., their assault marked by the grinding sound of metal against concrete as they pressed against the barriers. Sarah had made it back just in time, her crossbow already claiming 3 victims as she provided covering fire for the defenders. The zombies showed no fear of the obstacles, climbing over their fallen comrades with mechanical determination, but what disturbed her most was the way they seemed to learn from each failed attempt, adjusting their approach with each wave. The compound's eastern wall consisted of welded steel plates reinforced with concrete barriers, designed to funnel attackers into predetermined kill zones. Marcus had spent weeks perfecting the design, creating narrow gaps that forced enemies to approach single file where defenders could pick them off with relative ease. But as Sarah watched through her scope, she realized the infected were adapting to these tactics faster than anyone had anticipated. "They're not taking the bait," she radioed to Marcus, her voice tense with concern. "They're avoiding the kill zones and focusing on the weak points in the barriers." A group of zombies had gathered around a section where 2 steel plates met, and they were systematically working to widen the gap. Some pushed against the barrier while others used rocks and metal fragments to pry at the joints, their actions coordinated with disturbing precision. Tommychin positioned himself at the northeast corner, his rifle trained on the approaching horde. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that had kept him alive through countless encounters with the infected. Beside him, Lisa Martinez prepared medical supplies, knowing that casualties were inevitable once the fighting began in earnest. Her nursing background had evolved into combat medicine, and she had learned to work under fire, treating wounds while bullets flew overhead. "Contact north wall." Anna's voice crackled through the radio. 20+ infected approaching from the industrial district. "They're moving in formation, I repeat, they're maintaining formation." The tactical coordinator's police training had taught her to recognize organized threats, and what she saw through her binoculars defied everything she thought she knew about zombie behavior. The infected were advancing in what appeared to be a coordinated assault pattern, with some moving ahead as scouts while others followed in support groups. Jake Morrison's voice cut through the radio chatter from his position in the communications center. "That low-frequency signal is getting stronger. It's pulsing now, like some kind of command structure." The young man's technical expertise had become crucial to their survival, and his ability to monitor multiple communication channels had given them early warning of threats in the past. But this signal was unlike anything in his experience, too regular to be natural, too simple to be human technology. The first breach occurred at 11:15 a.m., when a section of the eastern barrier gave way under concentrated pressure. The infected had worked together to destabilize the foundation, with some digging while others pushed from above. Sarah watched in horror as zombies poured through the gap, their movements surprisingly fluid and coordinated. She picked off the first few with her crossbow, but more kept coming, forcing her to fall back to the secondary defensive line. "Breach on the east wall." Marcus's voice boomed through the compound's communication system. "All units, initiate fallback protocol Alpha. Do not let them establish a foothold." The former construction foreman had prepared for this possibility, designing multiple defensive layers that would allow the survivors to give ground while maintaining their ability to fight back. But the speed of the breakthrough had caught everyone off guard. Dr. Emily Foster emerged from the safe room, her medical bag slung over her shoulder and her face set with grim determination. The children were secure in the reinforced basement, but she was needed on the front lines. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she treated a defender who had been pulled too close to the barriers, his arm bearing deep gouges from infected fingernails. "We need to be careful about infection," she warned, applying antiseptic to the wounds. "These scratches can be just as dangerous as bites if they're not treated properly." The infected had learned to use their numbers as a weapon, piling up against the barriers until the sheer weight of bodies created ramps that others could climb. Sarah watched in fascination and horror as they displayed problem-solving abilities that had never been documented before. When one approach failed, they would regroup and try another, showing a level of tactical thinking that challenged everything the survivors thought they knew about their enemy. Anna coordinated the defense with military precision, moving fighters where they were needed most while maintaining communication with all units. "Tommy, I need you to cover the gap in Sector 3. Lisa, we've got wounded coming in from the south wall." Her voice remained steady despite the chaos, but the tactical situation was rapidly deteriorating. The infected weren't just mindless predators anymore, they were becoming an organized force capable of strategic thinking. As the first wave of zombies breached the outer defenses, the survivors faced a terrifying realization: the enemy they had learned to fight no longer existed. In its place was something far more dangerous, an intelligent adversary that could learn, adapt, and potentially outthink them. The battle for the compound had become a test of human ingenuity against an evolving threat that grew more dangerous with each passing hour. By noon, the situation had deteriorated rapidly beyond anyone's worst-case scenarios. The northern group had arrived and immediately began coordinating with the eastern assault, confirming Sarah's worst fears about their intelligence. What had started as two separate attacks had evolved into a sophisticated pincer movement that stretched the compound's defenses to their absolute limits. The infected weren't just working together, they were implementing military tactics that would have impressed human commanders. Dr. Foster emerged from the makeshift infirmary covered in blood, having just finished treating a defender who had been pulled too close to the barriers during the morning's fierce fighting. Her usually pristine white coat was stained crimson, and exhaustion showed in every line of her face. "We can't sustain this rate of casualties," she reported to Marcus, her medical bag slung over her shoulder and her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much suffering. 3 seriously wounded, and we're running low on antibiotics. If these infections spread, we'll lose people to disease before the zombies even reach them." The doctor's clinical training helped her maintain composure under pressure, but the stress was evident in the tremor of her hands as she checked her supplies. In the 3 months since the outbreak, she had transformed from a general practitioner treating common ailments to a battlefield medic performing emergency surgery with improvised tools. The compound's infirmary, set up in what used to be the fire station's equipment bay, had become a constant reminder of how precarious their survival truly was. Marcus surveyed the battlefield from his elevated position, his binoculars revealing the full scope of their predicament. The infected had discovered that by working together, they could destabilize sections of the barrier through coordinated pressure. Groups of zombies would push against weak points while others climbed over, creating multiple breach points that stretched the defenders thin. It was a level of tactical coordination that defied everything the survivors thought they knew about their enemy. "Anna, we need to concentrate our fire on the leaders," Marcus radioed to their tactical coordinator. Through his observations, he had noticed that certain infected seemed to be directing the others, pointing toward weak spots and organizing group efforts. These apparent commanders moved differently from the rest, maintaining positions behind the main assault while gesturing toward specific targets. If they could eliminate these coordinators, the attacks might lose their frightening efficiency. Anna acknowledged the order while simultaneously directing Tommy to reinforce the southern wall, where a new group of infected had begun probing their defenses. Her police training had taught her to recognize command structures, and she had independently reached the same conclusion as Marcus. "Roger that. I've identified 3 possible leaders in the northern group. Taking the shot now." Her rifle cracked twice in rapid succession, and 2 of the directing infected dropped. Almost immediately, the coordinated assault began to falter as the remaining zombies seemed confused about their objectives. Jake Morrison's voice crackled through the radio network with increasing urgency. "Marcus, that signal is changing. It's getting more complex, like it's adapting to our defensive measures." The young communications specialist had been monitoring the mysterious low-frequency transmission since morning, and its evolution was becoming more disturbing by the hour. "It's almost like it's learning from each failed attack and adjusting the commands accordingly." The implications were terrifying. If the infected were being controlled by some form of intelligence that could adapt and learn, then humanity's advantages of superior planning and technology were rapidly disappearing. The signal suggested a central command structure that could analyze their defensive tactics and develop countermeasures in real time. Lisa Martinez worked frantically to treat the wounded while maintaining her position on the north wall. Her nursing background had evolved into combat medicine, and she had learned to work under fire, applying tourniquets and bandages while bullets flew overhead. "We need to get the seriously wounded to the infirmary," she called out to Anna. "But I can't leave this position without compromising the entire wall." The defensive situation was becoming mathematically impossible. With limited ammunition, growing casualties, and an enemy that adapted to their tactics, the survivors faced the prospect of being overrun through simple attrition. Sarah realized they were fighting not just for the compound, but for the future of human resistance against an enemy that was evolving faster than they could adapt. "Marcus, I've got movement on the west side." Tommy's voice carried a note of panic. "It looks like they're trying to flank us completely. We're about to be surrounded." The youngest member of their fighting force had proven himself capable under pressure, but the strain of constant combat was beginning to show. His hands shook as he reloaded his rifle, muscle memory taking over while his mind struggled to process the tactical nightmare unfolding around them. The compound that had been their sanctuary for 3 months was rapidly becoming a trap. The infected had learned to use their numbers and coordination to overcome static defenses, and the survivors found themselves facing an enemy that combined the relentless hunger of the undead with the tactical thinking of a military force. As the afternoon sun beat down on the battlefield, it became clear that their carefully planned defenses were no match for an adversary that could think, learn, and adapt to their every move. As evening approached, Sarah made a disturbing discovery while studying the zombie behavior patterns from her elevated observation post in the compound's communication tower. The infected weren't just coordinating, they were demonstrating genuine problem-solving abilities that went far beyond simple instinct. She watched in fascination and horror as one group abandoned a futile assault on a reinforced section and redirected their efforts to a weaker point, behavior that suggested complex reasoning and tactical analysis. "Marcus, we need to talk," she radioed from her observation post, her voice carrying a tremor of fear that she couldn't quite suppress. "These things are adapting faster than we thought possible. They're not just following some basic programming, they're actually learning from their mistakes and developing new strategies in real time." The implications were staggering. If the infected could learn and adapt at this rate, then humanity's advantages of intelligence and planning were rapidly disappearing. Through her binoculars, Sarah observed something that made her blood run cold. A group of infected had discovered that the compound's water filtration system created a weak point in the southern wall where pipes entered the building. Rather than mindlessly attacking the reinforced barriers, they had identified this vulnerability and were systematically working to exploit it. Some dug around the pipe entry points while others gathered materials to use as digging tools, their actions coordinated with the precision of an engineering team. Jake's monitoring equipment in the communications center had picked up something even more disturbing. Radio chatter from other survivor groups was going silent one by one across the region. The young man's technical expertise had allowed him to maintain contact with 7 other settlements within a 50-mile radius, but over the past 6 hours, their emergency frequencies had fallen silent in rapid succession. The coordinated attacks weren't limited to their compound. Something was driving the infected to assault human settlements with unprecedented organization across a wide area. "Marcus, I'm losing contact with the settlement at Miller's farm," Jake reported, his voice tight with concern. "That's the 4th group to go dark today. The last transmission mentioned organized attacks and some kind of signal that was affecting the infected behavior. He paused, adjusting his equipment to scan additional frequencies. And Marcus, the signal strength here is still increasing. Whatever is controlling these things is getting closer. Dr. Foster had been monitoring the wounded in the infirmary when she noticed something that added another layer to the mystery. The 3 defenders who had been scratched by infected fingernails were showing symptoms that didn't match the typical infection pattern. Instead of the rapid deterioration and transformation that usually occurred within hours, they were experiencing fever, confusion, and what appeared to be enhanced sensory perception. "Marcus, I need you to see this," she called over the radio. "The infection is mutating. These scratches aren't causing the usual zombie transformation, they're creating something different." The doctor's clinical observations revealed that the wounded defenders were reporting heightened hearing and improved night vision, along with an unsettling ability to sense the location of nearby infected. Tommy, who had been scratched during the morning's fighting, described the sensation as hearing their thoughts before quickly insisting he was probably just delusional from fever. But Dr. Foster's medical training told her otherwise. The symptoms were too consistent across all 3 patients to be coincidental. Anna coordinated the defensive response while simultaneously trying to process the tactical implications of these revelations. Her police training had taught her to analyze criminal behavior patterns, but the infected were displaying organizational capabilities that surpassed many human criminal networks. "If they're learning this fast, our static defenses are useless," she reported to Marcus. "We need to start thinking about mobile tactics, guerrilla warfare. Fight them like they're an intelligent enemy, not mindless predators." The tactical coordinator had noticed that the infected were beginning to use deception in their attacks. Groups would feint toward one section of the perimeter while the real assault developed elsewhere, showing a level of strategic thinking that challenged everything the survivors thought they knew about their enemy. Some infected had even begun using debris to create makeshift bridges over defensive obstacles, displaying engineering capabilities that seemed impossible for creatures supposedly driven by simple hunger. As darkness fell over the compound, the mysterious signal that Jake had been monitoring reached a crescendo. The low-frequency transmission had evolved into something resembling a complex communication protocol, with different patterns corresponding to different types of zombie behavior. When the signal pulsed in rapid bursts, the infected would coordinate their attacks. When it shifted to a steady tone, they would retreat and regroup. It was as if someone, or something, was conducting an orchestra of the undead. Sarah's final observation of the day provided the most chilling revelation of all. As she watched the infected through her night vision scope, she noticed that some of them were no longer feeding on the bodies of fallen defenders. Instead, they were carefully examining the corpses, studying human defensive positions and equipment with the curiosity of scientists conducting research. The enemy wasn't just learning to fight, they were learning to understand their prey, gathering intelligence that would make future attacks even more devastating. The survivors faced a terrifying realization: they were no longer fighting mindless zombies, but an evolving intelligence that grew more dangerous with each encounter. With ammunition running dangerously low and the barriers beginning to fail under relentless pressure, Marcus made a decision that would define their survival or seal their doom. The compound's fuel reserves, carefully hoarded for 3 months against an uncertain future, would be sacrificed to create a massive firebreak around the perimeter. It was a desperate gambit that would consume their hard-won resources and leave them vulnerable to the approaching winter, but it might buy them the precious time needed to evacuate to their secondary location. "Anna, I need you to coordinate the fuel distribution," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that could save or condemn them all. "We're going to turn this place into an inferno and use the confusion to break out." The former construction foreman had spent the last hour calculating burn rates and wind patterns, using his engineering knowledge to design a controlled explosion that would create maximum chaos among the infected while providing clear escape routes for the survivors. The plan was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its finality. Using the compound's stored gasoline, diesel fuel, and propane tanks, they would create a ring of fire that would force the infected to retreat while simultaneously destroying everything they had built. The fire station that had been their home, the carefully constructed defenses that had protected them, and the supplies they had gathered would all be consumed in a desperate bid for survival. Anna led a strike team consisting of Tommy, Lisa, and 3 other defenders to secure the evacuation route while Marcus and Jake prepared the incendiary devices. The tactical coordinator's police training had taught her urban warfare techniques, and she applied those skills to planning their escape through the zombie-infested city streets. "We move fast, we move quiet, and we stick together," she briefed the team. "Once that fire starts, we'll have maybe 10 minutes before the infected regroup and start tracking us again." Dr. Foster worked frantically to prepare the wounded for transport, knowing that moving patients in their condition was risky but that staying meant certain death. The 3 defenders who had been scratched by infected showed the most promise for survival. Their enhanced senses and apparent immunity to the standard zombie virus made them invaluable scouts for the journey ahead. Tommy, despite his fever and confusion, insisted he could fight and proved it by accurately predicting the location of infected groups before they came into view. "The signal is going crazy," Jake reported from his position at the communications equipment. "It's like whatever is controlling these things knows we're planning something." The young man had rigged a portable radio setup that would allow them to maintain communication during the evacuation, but the mysterious transmission was interfering with their frequencies. "Marcus, I think we need to move now. That signal is getting stronger by the minute, and the infected are massing for another major assault." Sarah coordinated the perimeter teams while simultaneously preparing charges at key structural points around the compound. Her knowledge of the building's weak points, gained through months of defensive planning, now served a destructive purpose. "Charges are set on the east and north walls," she reported. "Once we blow them, the infected will pour in just as the fire starts. It should create enough chaos to cover our escape." The infected seemed to sense the increased activity within the compound and pressed their attack with renewed vigor, as if understanding that their prey was attempting to escape. The zombie commanders that Anna had identified earlier were directing more coordinated assaults, with some groups creating diversions while others prepared for what appeared to be a final overwhelming push. The barriers that had held for hours were beginning to buckle under the sustained pressure. Lisa Martinez provided medical support to the strike team while maintaining her position as a defender, her nursing training allowing her to multitask under extreme pressure. "Dr. Foster, the enhanced patients are stable enough to move," she reported. "But we need to monitor them closely. Their vital signs are unlike anything I've seen before." The mutation caused by the infected scratches was creating physiological changes that could prove either beneficial or catastrophic during the evacuation. As Marcus prepared to give the signal to begin their desperate gambit, Dr. Foster made a discovery that changed everything. The blood samples from the scratched defenders contained antibodies that appeared to neutralize the zombie virus while enhancing human capabilities. "Marcus, these people might be the key to fighting this thing," she called over the radio. "If we can synthesize these antibodies, we might be able to create an immunity serum." The revelation added new urgency to their escape. They weren't just running to save their lives, they might be carrying the biological key to humanity's survival. The 3 enhanced defenders, despite their discomfort and confusion, represented hope for the future in a way that none of them had dared to imagine. "All teams, prepare for ignition," Marcus announced, his finger hovering over the detonator. "In 30 seconds, we light this place up and make our run for freedom. Stay close, stay alive, and remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves anymore. We might be fighting for the future of the human race." The flames roared to life just as the eastern barrier finally gave way, creating a wall of fire between the survivors and certain death. The evacuation became a running battle through the city streets as the survivors fought their way toward the designated rally point, an abandoned subway station that Marcus had identified as their secondary shelter months earlier. The infected pursued relentlessly, their numbers seemingly endless as more emerged from buildings and side streets, drawn by the sounds of combat and the acrid smoke billowing from the burning compound behind them. The fire had created the intended chaos, but it had also served as a beacon, attracting every zombie within miles to their location. Sarah covered the retreat with deadly precision, her crossbow singing as she picked off zombies that got too close to the fleeing civilians. Each bolt had to count, her ammunition was nearly exhausted, and there would be no opportunity to retrieve spent projectiles from the bodies of the fallen infected. The children were carried by the adults, their frightened faces a stark reminder of what they were fighting to preserve. 8-year-old Emma clung to Dr. Foster's back, her small arms wrapped tightly around the doctor's neck as they navigated the debris-strewn streets. Jake struggled with the radio equipment while running for his life, the portable communications setup bouncing awkwardly against his back as he tried to maintain contact with other survivor groups. The mysterious signal had reached an intensity that was interfering with all electronic devices, creating static that made communication nearly impossible. "I'm getting fragments from the Miller Farm group," he gasped between breaths. "They're under attack too, sounds like the same coordinated assault we just escaped." The enhanced defenders, Tommy, Lisa, and a man named David who had been scratched during the morning's fighting, proved invaluable as scouts and early warning systems. Their heightened senses allowed them to detect infected ambushes before the group walked into them, though the fever and disorientation caused by their condition made them increasingly unpredictable. Tommy had begun speaking in fragmented sentences, his enhanced hearing picking up conversations that weren't there, while his improved night vision allowed him to guide the group through darkened buildings. "Left turn here," Tommy whispered urgently, his eyes reflecting light like an animal's in the darkness. "Big group coming from the east, maybe 30 of them. They're moving in formation, just like at the compound." His enhanced abilities came with a disturbing cost. He claimed he could sense the infected's intentions, describing their thoughts as a constant buzzing in his head that grew louder with proximity. Anna coordinated the group's movement with military precision, using hand signals and whispered commands to maintain discipline under extreme stress. Her police training had taught her urban escape and evasion techniques, but leading civilians through a zombie-infested city while carrying wounded pushed her skills to their limits. "Dr. Foster, how much further can the wounded travel?" she asked quietly, noting that 2 of the seriously injured defenders were struggling to keep pace. Dr. Foster assessed their condition while continuing to move, her medical training allowing her to multitask under pressure. "David is stable, but Marcus is losing blood faster than I can replace it," she reported, referring to their leader who had been injured during the final moments of the compound's defense. "We need to reach shelter soon, or we're going to lose him." The group's leader had taken shrapnel from an explosion during the evacuation, and despite Dr. Foster's field treatment, his condition was deteriorating. In the subway tunnels, they discovered they weren't alone. Other survivors had had the same idea, and the underground network had become a refuge for the desperate and the displaced. The platforms were crowded with families, individuals, and remnants of other defensive groups who had been forced to abandon their positions. The tunnels echoed with whispered conversations in multiple languages, creating a babble of human desperation. But the infected had followed them down into the darkness. The zombies' enhanced coordination extended to underground navigation, and they moved through the tunnel system with disturbing efficiency. Sarah watched through her scope as infected scouts explored side passages while others maintained positions at key intersections, effectively trapping the survivors in an underground maze with limited escape routes. "They're sealing us in," Sarah reported to Anna, her voice tight with controlled fear. "They've got groups at every major exit I can see. This isn't random, they're implementing a containment strategy." The tactical implications were terrifying. If the infected could coordinate complex operations like siege warfare, then underground shelters were no longer safe havens but potential death traps. Jake's radio equipment finally managed to cut through the interference, picking up a transmission that made everyone freeze. A human voice, clear and calm, was broadcasting on emergency frequencies. "Attention all survivors in the metropolitan area. This is Dr. Chen at the Federal Research Facility. We have developed a potential treatment for the infection. If you can hear this message, make your way to the University District. We have established a safe zone and are working on a cure." The message repeated twice before dissolving back into static, but it had provided something the survivors desperately needed: hope and a destination that offered more than mere survival. The tunnels had become a trap, but they also led directly toward the University District and the possibility of salvation that lay waiting in the darkness ahead. In the depths of the subway system, the survivors made their final stand against an enemy that had evolved far beyond their worst nightmares. The tunnels provided defensive advantages, limited approach routes and choke points that could be held by small groups, but they also meant no escape if the defenses failed. The concrete walls that offered protection also created an echo chamber where every sound was amplified, turning whispered conversations into potential death sentences and making stealth nearly impossible. Dr. Foster set up a medical station in an abandoned train car, transforming the passenger compartment into a field hospital where she worked desperately to save Marcus's life. The group's leader had lost consciousness during the journey through the tunnels, and his breathing had become shallow and irregular. "His blood pressure is dropping too fast," she whispered to Anna, who had assumed command in Marcus's absence. "Without proper surgical facilities, I can only do so much." The doctor's hands moved with practiced efficiency despite the dire circumstances, using supplies salvaged from the compound's medical bay. Anna organized the defense of the main tunnel entrance with the precision of a military operation, positioning the remaining fighters at strategic points where they could maximize their limited ammunition. The tactical coordinator had identified 3 critical choke points where small groups could hold off larger forces, but success depended on coordination and discipline under extreme pressure. "Sarah, I need you on the north platform with Tommy and David. Jake, you're with me at the main entrance. Lisa, stay with Dr. Foster and the civilians." The infected poured into the tunnels like a dark tide, their moans echoing off the concrete walls and creating a symphony of horror that threatened to break the survivors' resolve. Unlike their previous encounters, these zombies moved with calculated purpose, some carrying improvised weapons while others used their bodies as shields to protect more valuable specimens. Sarah watched in fascination and terror as infected wearing the tattered remains of military uniforms directed the assault with hand signals, their enhanced intelligence allowing them to implement complex tactical maneuvers. Tommy's enhanced senses had become both a blessing and a curse in the confined space of the tunnels. His ability to detect infected movement through walls and around corners provided early warning, but the constant buzzing of zombie thoughts in his head was driving him toward a psychological breaking point. "They're not just attacking," he reported to Anna, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining coherence. "They're herding us toward something. This whole tunnel system is part of a larger trap." Jake had managed to restore limited radio communication, and the fragments of transmissions he received painted a grim picture of the wider situation. Survivor settlements across the region had fallen to coordinated attacks, and the mysterious signal that controlled the infected was originating from multiple sources, suggesting a network of command centers. "Anna, I'm picking up reports from the University District," he called out between bursts of static. "Dr. Chen's facility is under siege too. Whatever is controlling these things doesn't want us reaching that research station." The infected pressed their attack with relentless determination, using their numbers as a weapon while displaying tactical sophistication that rivaled human military units. Some zombies created diversions while others flanked through maintenance tunnels, and their commanders adapted their strategy in real time based on the survivors' defensive responses. Sarah's crossbow claimed victim after victim, but for every infected she dropped, 2 more took its place. Anna made the decision that would define their survival when she noticed that the infected were avoiding a section of tunnel that led deeper into the system. "There's something down there they don't want us to find," she told the group. "Maybe it's connected to that research facility Dr. Chen mentioned." It was a desperate gambit, venturing deeper underground while being pursued by an army of the infected, but staying put meant certain death. Dr. Foster made the agonizing choice to move Marcus despite his critical condition, knowing that leaving him meant abandoning their leader to die alone in the darkness. The enhanced defenders, Tommy, David, and Lisa, who had been scratched during the tunnel fighting, volunteered to serve as rear guard, their improved reflexes and sensory abilities making them the most effective fighters against the infected pursuit. As the group moved deeper into the tunnel system, they discovered that their enhanced companions were changing in ways that went beyond improved senses. David had begun to demonstrate an intuitive understanding of the infected's behavior patterns, while Lisa showed signs of developing limited telepathic abilities that allowed her to sense the emotional states of both humans and zombies. The mutation was accelerating, creating something new that was neither fully human nor infected. The final confrontation came at an abandoned subway control center where the survivors found evidence of government research into the infection, computers still running underground experiments that had been abandoned when the outbreak began. Jake's technical skills allowed him to access the systems, revealing that the zombie intelligence was artificial, created by military experiments that had gone catastrophically wrong. In the end, it wasn't superior firepower that saved them, but the discovery that the enhanced humans could interface with the control systems and disrupt the signal network. As Tommy connected to the research computers, his transformed nervous system allowed him to understand and ultimately shut down the artificial intelligence that had been coordinating the infected attacks. The last stand had ended not in victory or defeat, but in the realization that evolution, both human and artificial, would define the future of their world.